given diagnostic methods. So for instance, a high school student comes to one of our high schools. We can tell immediately that they are a struggling reader. Right now we have some things in place that help us with that, but I don't know that we feel confident that across all high schools we can all say with assurance, this is how we both diagnose and determine what an intervention should be. Same thing with math or any of those core subject areas. It also has to do with being able to place a student well and quickly so that when a student comes, we can get them into the right schedule with the right courses, and that we make sure we're not wasting time in their schedule, and that we're trying to keep them on track as much as possible toward that goal of graduation. So this is really about consistency, guaranteeing, diagnosing, and then delivering effective interventions. Questions for this? Or you want to write them down?
You want to write it down, or you have a quick one?
I think it's quick.
Go ahead.
I with all due respect, Dawn, I mean, we have said this is a long process. So I kind of feel that if this is part of the longer process, we really need to have the time to really kind of think it through. So is this only with identified kids? I mean, so this is a good goal for really
Struggling.
broad. So like as you said, if you get to high school and you've never been identified as a special ed kid of any tier, this would be, am I correct in understanding this is part of this goal?
This is for struggling students. So
So we're broadening our concept totally, and this is one of our bigger ways of broadening.
yes. And I want to be really clear that we have a number of things in place already that help us to diagnose and determine needs and deliver interventions. But this, again, gets to that consistency. And I would say, if anything, this may relate more to struggling students, more so than those who have been verified for special ed services. And so we have to have ways of looking at a 7th grader, and maybe they're falling behind on some of their coursework, and it's because the content level, maybe they've started to kind of hit the point of frustration where they're not able to keep up because they're not able to do the text at that grade level. How do we quickly intervene and help them with the right things at the right time to keep them on track? That would be one example of many, many things that we could talk about. Does that help to clarify?
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Good, thanks, Annie. Let's go on to goal
Okay,
number 4.
next one. This is about defining the approach for providing social, emotional, and behavioral supports for students. This is another really big goal. This goes into the implementation and fidelity of PBIS, and I'm not going to go through these in great detail. It's about our existing people that we have working in our schools already providing these services and how we're distributing those services. This is a goal when we start to look at, somebody mentioned earlier, fiscal note or budget considerations. This may be where we continue to say we need to build capacity of our district overall and add more supports, but it may also be in how we're positioning them. Looking at how we can deliver those services during the school day. Here again, this is something that's going to be difficult because we're already fighting for those instructional minutes. We don't want to pull kids from things that we want them to be participating in. So how can we deliver some of those services within the school day? Additional training so that more people know more things about those social, emotional, and behavioral supports. A data system that tells us what we're doing and what the effect of those interventions is on our student learning, on things like attendance, on truancies, on all those indicators that we have. Oops, I just moved my slide, sorry, I didn't mean to. Additional supports for students with those intensive needs and the skills that they need to have to ensure consistent services in predictable environments. That's a huge way of saying we keep having more intensity, more complexity around student needs, and how do we equip people to do the work that meets those needs in our school environments. Might have to do with space, might have to do with levels of expertise, or how we have staff trained maybe additionally to meet the needs of students. And then finally looking at cluster sites, and we talked about this a little bit the other night, for students who may not fit well within some of our alternative programs but still need a higher level of intensity of services in a place that is conducive both space-wise and that we can put the right teachers with the right students. This is a big goal. Question?
Kathy?
I'm not sure if it's a question or an observation, so I'm trying to frame it where it sounds the least egregious. Because it's trying to protect the learning environment for all students as well. And there's sometimes a student who may or may not have violent tendencies. Because my concern is that that student gets the help they need, but I also don't want that student to totally take over the learning environment of 25 to 28 other students. And sometimes I think we fall a little short on making sure those things are taken care of in the regular classroom. So I know you're talking about cluster sites, and we got a long time to get that in. So just somebody keep in mind to bring me up to speed how that's going to serve those kids and the learning environment for the other students, because I do think the tolerance of students who don't have special needs needs to be really, really important too, that they understand the kids that do have special needs. There's a give and take there, and I want to make sure that we have both parts of that in this long-term discussion.
And that's really to goal 9. That's exactly what we were trying to get at, because we see that both in the life skills population, but also for students with pretty intensive behavior concerns. So
My greatest concern is that we ignore something and a child leaves the protected environment of an LPS and they get out into the real world, and it's not a slap your hand and send you back to another, but they end up going to some other life-altering facility that they can no longer be forgiven in. And that, for me, is a long-term failing of education systems all over the country.
And I would like to go back to the opportunity goal, number 4 up there, because I have to continue to remind myself what we're trying to accomplish with all these things, which is really defining what do we do to meet these needs, and how do we put in layers of assurances so that when we're seeing that we're still not getting the progress that we would like to see with a student, we know what steps we follow, we know what the progression is in order to keep kids safe, in order to provide the correct services in the right place. But this is one, I can tell you, this work will never end. And so when we look at this, I think this is one that will constantly be in motion, but I have to keep going back to, we're all really clear about what we do, how we do it, when we do it, and who's involved with it.
Thank you for that.
Barb?
If I could add one last thought, and then I apologize that I've got to
It's like
leave.
the great, powerful Oz.
But God.
Go ahead, we're laughing because you're really loud, we got
He's
it.
like
Keep forgetting
Oz.
you're there.
I am Oz.
I never go away, but actually about conversation about this opportunity in particular. It's a really good conversation highlighting A, the complexity of this. And B, Jane said it, and I just want to echo it, because I shared it with you when I was going through the report. This is probably the one area in which we're seeing more and more needs, and there may very well be a need for greater financial investment in this area. But at the same time, whether you make a bigger investment or not, it's how do you maximize the impact, the benefit for kids in this very challenging area. And the reason we're saying to create a more clearly defined approach is that you have a lot of smart people in the district, a lot of talented people who are working around social emotional behavior. But there is great power when there is consistency, when there's predictability for the students, and when these groups of people work as a team. So it's this is a complicated one, but one that all of your staff and all of the schools said, hey, this is just a growing challenge. And you've got a lot of company across the country for that. And the last point to make is And I totally understand the concern of need to meet the needs of the kids who are having the challenges, and at the same time, meeting the needs of the kids who are also in the classroom who don't have the challenges. But this is one of the true great win-wins in public education, because when these supports are working and working well, they really focus on prevention. So you prevent and minimize and reduce the number of outbursts or incidences. So it really is your ability to well serve the students with some challenges doesn't come at the cost of kids in the classroom who don't have those challenges. So not easy work, but when you can make all this happen, really everybody benefits, and teachers as well, because they've got an uninterrupted learning environment.
Thanks, Nate. Barb, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to just highlight that I have concerns about cluster sites. I think it's important that we mainstream our struggling students, including when they have behavioral, social, emotional issues. I also don't want us to fall into the trap of going and burdening some schools or neighborhoods with the stigma of being a cluster site. And because right now, if it's done in the manner that we traditionally have done cluster sites for other issues, I can almost name the neighborhoods who will get the cluster sites. And for those of us who live in those neighborhoods who believe that diversity and income diversity as well are good values, I don't think that it is a good idea to go and have cluster sites going and putting yet another label on a neighborhood or a school that is not reflective of the true character of that school or neighborhood. So I hope that if that is something that's explored, that it'd be done very cautiously with that in mind, because we don't want to, I understand the logic of it. You want the expertise to be there, the consistency to be there, but there's a lot of fallout when you do cluster sites. And I know it's a divergent subject, but this district had really bought into cluster sites for ELL at one point, and it was very, very deteriorating on the neighborhoods, the home neighborhoods, who had their ELL students taken out of their neighborhoods, and then their neighbors never got to go and know them in the common space of a school. And then things started to not be good in that neighborhood because the common place to get to know each other wasn't there. So that's one example. I really think we should be cautious with that.
Anyone else? Okay, let's go on to goal 5. We have 10 minutes.
Yep.
We're okay. What we can do.
I'm gonna skim goal 4. Are we moving the slide? There we go. This one really is just about fidelity with PBIS and the systems that we use, the way that we collect and share data, the way that we are looking at fidelity across all of our schools, and the way that we're providing supports to our students for those self-advocacy kinds of behaviors, things like second steps, things like proactively working with counselors. Can I move a little quickly through these? Okay. Goal 5, this really is about the mental health supports and looking at best practices, recommendations, working with community partners, looking at how we can really continue to kind of fill in the gaps where we have them. And what I think we all believe to be true about this is there's probably some untapped resources that we have not maybe put in place, or some ways of using resources that we have in some new ways to continue to provide the supports we want to our students. The last piece there, of course, is professional development. We've been doing some really good work with trauma and with some specific mental health kinds of professional development. It's been very well received, and we know there's just a lot more work to be done there.
Okay, let's keep going.
Okay. Goal number 6 is looking at the time that we would like to have in existing schedules to provide the social, emotional, behavioral supports. When we go to deliver that curriculum, how do we continue to have the minutes that we need to do that? Trying to embed some of that time in other curricular areas so that it partners well rather than duplicates. Looking at the positive relationships that kids have with adults and making sure that we are able to be individualized with students when the need arises. Looking at delivery of Tier 1 and Tier 2, how we currently deliver those things, and then continue to look for ways to position that curriculum or those components in existing areas. Might be health, might be social studies, wherever we can see some good crossover. Goal number 7. Jenny, why don't you talk? Take over.
This
Right
area is really to strengthen our social and emotional behavioral supports by looking at those specific areas like trauma, anxiety, depression. At the high school level, we have substance abuse. And then really developing that professional learning opportunities around those different areas, because we want to create individual learning opportunities for teachers. So when they have a student with substance abuse, they have a class available, whether that be an online class or something that we're offering throughout the year. And then we also want to continue to look at a comprehensive system to look at how we deliver all the professional development. I had shared before, throughout this plan, there's a lot of professional development, so it's going to be essential that we look at how we do that as a district, because we can't provide all this professional development to our teachers at once. When you look at Goal 8, right now, we have really worked with Synergy to develop a user-friendly system, but there's still many things that are needed. For example, a lot of our teachers have, and school administrators have information out on Google Docs or multiple spreadsheets. And so to get that behavior data, sometimes they're looking at 3 or 4 different areas. And so they're spending their time looking at the different resources instead of analyzing the data. And so this is something that was really important to our group to make sure we continue to explore this area.
And I will just add, this is a wonderful thing that people are asking for more of this and for better ways to have our data displayed and used. I mean, it's a great thing to see because they're doing such a great job now. We want more capacity. Keep going, you're doing great.
Okay. Goal number 9 is really for those students, both verified and not verified, with intensive behavioral supports and also in the area of life skills. So life skills meaning students that have lower cognitive abilities. And we are just finding that we need to continue with very specific professional development and knowledge in those areas. Our students are changing, and so our knowledge and our expertise has to change and evolve with these students. One thing that we really felt was important as we worked as a coalition, that if I'm a life skills teacher, I may be the only life skills teacher in my building. I need an opportunity to go see what Jane is doing with life skills in her building and go and watch that and have an opportunity to see how she has systems put in place. We had this year a teacher from Don Sherrill go to one of our elementary schools and spend an extensive amount of time coaching and looking at their systems. And that was very beneficial. We just don't have the structure in place that we can do that on an ongoing basis. So that's something that we want to look at with that one. The last one is developing the cluster sites. We do have about 8 to 12 students at each level, so elementary, middle, and high school. We currently have a high school cluster site at East for students with low cognitive ability and social emotional concerns. We are looking at having another site at elementary, or a site at elementary and one at middle school, because we are seeing that we have students across our district that are really needing a lot of support. So we have students in that life skills area that may need 2 or 3 staff members working with them at a time. And so we may have a student at Arnold needing that support. We may have another student at Maxie needing that support. And so what we are wanting to do is bring all the students together into one site so we have that level of expertise, but yet we can still maximize our staffing. And so we are looking at how we can do that. We had a committee that just focused on this action step, and they did a lot of work. We actually met 5 different times to go through this action step because they shared very similar concerns that Barb expressed before. And so we want to make sure that we are doing this so it doesn't overburden a school, but yet we're meeting those really high staffing students that take up a lot of different resources, and that is a growing area. They don't fit at our Don Sherrill, Nuremberg, or Yankee Hill because of their low cognitive abilities.
And I want to be just really clear with this. I think you're right. When you talk about cluster sites, that automatically implies something. This is a very narrow, kind of a singular strand of that, not cluster sites in terms of this particular group here and this group here and this group here. This is for this narrow specific need. And so I just want to make sure that we're clear, because I think when you say cluster sites, that's automatically what people begin to think of. So that's good to think about.
So we're looking 8 to 12 students at each level.
Okay, moving on to the special ed coordinator, and we'll just touch on this. I think this one is a little bit more self-explanatory, and if you want to advance one more slide, Kristen. We talked about this a little bit before. This is really making sure that people are doing the work that we want them to be doing in terms of student contact, in terms of the way that we're coordinating those special education services. And this one will be another one that's very complex, because as soon as you start to look at one role, like I said, you end up looking at many other roles. Some people have already started to kind of take a look at this even at a building level, and have reassigned some of those clerical duties as they've made some changes maybe in their office staff. And I think that's one of the steps, 11.4 there, but that's in addition to all of these other things, including training those special education coordinators just in that coaching model. So we really want to get the best benefit that we can from this position, but we know that it has a lot of moving parts to it. And with that, Kristen, are you still there?
Yeah,
Do you want to wrap us up?
sure. So, the work to date, first of all, I want to emphasize that the Guiding Coalition and the leadership team at Lincoln has done a tremendous amount of work in a short amount of time. And based upon my experience and Nate's experience working with other districts with this similar type of work, because of the capacity and the talent that this team had at hand, we were able to accomplish so much, and more so than we see typically in other districts on this given timeline. So first of all, just wanted to again commend the work that we've done so far, but the work is not done yet. So next steps are continuing the action planning. What you've seen are those high-level steps for each goal that the group will be focusing on. But working groups will be continuing to flesh out more details for those action steps with guidance from district management group. And then another big area for our next steps is thinking about the communication plan. So with the Lincoln leadership team, DM Group will work with them to develop a communication plan for sharing these plans out more broadly, like we mentioned, with teachers, with other stakeholders, and gather those that feedback to inform those more detailed action steps that we'll be developing along the way. Anything else you'd like to add, Jane or Jenny?
I was just saying to Jenny, what I'd like to do is just get our list of the Guiding Coalition out to board members so that instead of taking time tonight, you can see all the varied roles that they have and how they fit into this work. But I would just like to recognize them once again and thank them for being here. And we also appreciate the work Kristen and Frank did as they were with our groups doing the work. And so I think what I'll ask is if you have any questions, send them to me, and Jenny and I and others will begin answering those. And what I would propose is we bring this back to our next Student Learning Committee meeting, and then we determine some next steps from there to keep the work progressing.
Perfect, and thanks again, all of you, for taking 2 days out of your time. I
2.5.
see many of you I taught with, so thank you so much for taking those 2 days out. And Dr. Joel wants to wrap
Just
it up.
very, very quickly, because I know we're out of time. First of all, thank you to Dr. Stavum and to Dr. Fundus. They put in a lot of personal blood, sweat, and tears into this. This is not easy work. I think when you look at these 9 goals or 10 goals that we're going to focus on, this is multiple years, but it's a major commitment by us to evoke positive change. And that change will produce accountable results for kids. And we went into this whole study with the idea that we needed an invitation to have difficult conversations. Because the first thing you always hear from people in a system like ours that does very, very well, and this is not a criticism at all, but it's a reality, is we don't really need to change because what part of our results don't you like? We do well, but we can do better. And these areas are really designed to focus on how we can do better. But we have to do it in a very difficult financial environment, which is why efficiency and effectiveness really have to be part of each one of these conversations. So I want to join the bevy of voices and say thank you to our Guiding Coalition. That was not only 2.5 days, but I'm sure it was a lot of nighttime and weekend time and collaboration time to be able to put this together. This is a great body of work. Thank you, Kristen, for pointing that out. But the work is now just beginning.
All right.
Anything
Thank you.
else?
Yay,
All right.
technology worked.
Good. We are adjourned.
Thanks, Kristen.